You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hey guys, it's so good to be back with you all again, and we've got another packed show for you this week. You're listening to episode number 469 of Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. I'm Mighty Blue. Our main guest today is another one of those extraordinary young women who I'm always raving about. Her name is Dr. Lydia Kuhn, and she was described to me by a listener, Mark Alamong, who described her as a true badass. And as you're going to be hearing shortly, that is exactly what she is. Lydia will be on in a moment. As you know, we've been running ads from our show sponsor, TSX Challenge, for the past few weeks. So I thought it might be a good idea for the man himself, Chris Casado, to come on the show for a chat to update us on some of the exciting places these guys visit. Chris will be on after Lydia. Finally today, after both Lydia and Chris, in her book Happy Hiking, Emily starts hiking with another of our previous guests on the podcast, Steve Vilsack, or Why Not. They also meet the Cookie Lady together, another great rite of passage on the Appalachian Trail. Now, just before we move on to meet Lydia, I've got some really exciting news to tell you all. Hopefully you listened to the show last week, and you probably remember that David Kibalowski was our guest. And we started an auction for the Smokonic's book that David had bought from the Michael Smokonic's radio show on Sirius XM. I opened the bidding at $100, and of course, I was hoping to spark enough interest to get the number up to, $400. This would enable one kid from the AT Kids Foundation to go to summer camp. Well, I know I said I'd probably keep it open for 2 weeks, but the contest is over. Two of our listeners, Michael and Jeff, and I won't say their surnames, got into a bit of a bidding war and encouraging each other to keep going. We ended up with Jeff getting the book, but that's only a side story. What Michael said was that the book wasn't of great interest to him, but he really wanted to support David's mission, and said that if Jeff would bid up to $1,600, and both of them started over $1,000, then he, Michael, would match him, and both would fund the mission with $1,600 each. That's $3,200, or 8 kids to summer camp. That is just extraordinary. I've decided still to contribute my small bit of $100, and I encourage any of you who consider supporting this worthy cause to follow Michael and Jeff's super generous offers and contribute yourselves. If we can get another $300, we'll be up to 9 children going to summer camp. And you know, that is probably the most important thing I've ever done with this podcast. So thanks guys for really making my year so far. How about that? Now let's move on and meet this true badass, Lydia Kuhn, or Tetris. Our guest today is not only a multiple long-distance thru-hiker, but she's also a doctor. This is Dr. Lydia Kuhn. Hey Lydia, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Steve. I appreciate it.
Now, I know that you haven't been a thru-hiker for a very long time. Tell us how the Appalachian Trail first came on your radar.
Yeah. So just to kind of give the audience an idea, so thru hiking kind of came into my periphery when I was in my mid-30s. So, you know, kind of late to the game for some of these thru hikers that I have now since met. But I am originally from Georgia, and so had kind of heard about the Appalachian Trail, but had never met anybody who had thru hiked. And I loved being outside and doing some day hikes, but I'd never done anything like that. And kind of was at a point in my life in my mid-30s where I wanted to take a bit of a pause and do something just very radically different in my life. And I thought...
What does that mean to you? What does taking a pause mean to you?
Well, 6 months. 6 months of thru hiking, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I was, working as a physician in Georgia, and I was, dating a lovely guy at the time, but just felt, I think overall with, career and things like that, a little bit stuck. And I was thinking, okay, I need to make a change. I don't know how to do that. And at the time I was thinking I might need to make a change in my career. And I wasn't sure that the person that I was dating at the time was the person for me long term. And I felt that I just needed to kind of press pause and say, okay, I think the only way that I'm going to really be able to get perspective on my life is to just do something so out of my normal that kind of just shakes up everything to give me a different perspective on things.
He must have felt great, by the way, when you had that conversation.
Well,
So, hang on, take me back to that moment. How did you raise that conversation with him?
Yeah, so it was interesting. So I had already had the idea to do the AT, kind of percolating in the back of my brain before he and I started dating.
All right.
And I remember saying, no matter what happens, with us, this is something I need to do regardless. Right. And of course we were kind of early on then. So it was still more of like, well, we're still getting to know each other. So I don't even know if it's going to last to the point where I'm going to go off to do the AT or not. And when I got to that point of, okay, I'm about to start the Appalachian Trail, and we were a year into our relationship at that point.
Wow.
And, he said, and I think very, adult, very adult question was, if I'm going to be here waiting for you for 6 months, I want to know that there's a commitment on the other end of this.
And he was prepared to?
He was. And
hats off to him.
Yes. I mean, that's a big deal. And I know you and I kind of mentioned that being the person on the other side and kind of holding down the fort at home is probably the harder of the two jobs.
Sure.
And I thought that this was a very defining moment for our relationship. And I said, I don't think it's fair for me to ask you to wait for 6 months when I don't know, that I think there is long-term
This
here.
falls into that bucket of questions. Don't ask if you don't want the answer. Really. Perhaps you shouldn't have asked that.
Well, but at the same time, I think it was right. We were not meant to be together, and it was a very natural, I think, breaking point, because, then I was going to go off and do the AT and he was going to be able to move on at home. And it was definitely the right thing to do. And in some ways, I think it allowed the AT to be more my experience.
Sure.
And that's exactly what I needed at that point in my life, for the AT to be so singularly mine. Yeah.
So how did you prepare, your gear, your physical preparation and so on? I mean, what did you have a plan? What were you looking to do to make this happen?
I am a really bad planner.
Right.
But I think I do. My personality is more, I get an idea in my head, I can't get rid of the idea, and then I just go do it. But planning for me, I had no idea what a thru hike would entail. I learned so much just by physically being on the trail. But a little bit of my preparation was, obviously I downloaded maps. I read about different points to be able to get food and resupply. I looked at bloggers who had blogged about their AT thru hike to kind of get some sort of idea of what lay ahead of me. But I mean, as you probably know, nothing prepares you for your first thru hike until you do your first thru hike. That's
right. You take those first steps. I don't know. I think I've mentioned this a few times on the show, but my very first step on the AT at the top of Springer Mountain, I bumped into an overhanging branch which got an egg-sized bump on my head. And then I missed the first shelter, which was 300 yards down the trail. So I got lost and had an injury in the first 300 steps, and I still made it at the end. So you just never know how that's going to happen. So what about gear? Were you looking to get as light as possible, or did you take advice from YouTube and that sort of thing?
I didn't actually do much with YouTube. No, I probably should have, actually, retrospectively. And you know what? As far as gear, I didn't really know about the ultralight world at that point. I think I was just trying to make what I had work, because, it's very expensive to get all of that gear. And so I, basically used a backpack that I already had, a sleeping bag that was way too heavy. The only ultralight piece of gear that I had, thank you, my parents, was a gift of a Z-Pax duplex tent.
Nice. That's what I had.
Yeah. And I loved it. It was great. It lasted me multiple through hikes until this year, and then it totally disintegrated. But yeah, that was my only probably ultralight piece of gear. And I'm glad I had that, because my backpack going onto the AT day one was probably, it was probably close to 40 pounds.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was definitely a lot.
That is a large percentage of your body weight, I suspect. So that is way too much. But you know what? The thing about a trip like that, a bit like any experience in life, when you think something isn't working, you make adjustments on the fly, don't you? Mm-hmm. And it's your ability to make those adjustments on the fly, especially you as a doctor. I'm sure you have to make adjustments all the time in your work life as well. You make those adjustments and you make it work for you better next time, don't you?
You really do. And I try to tell people who, say, well, I would never know how to do that, or I could never do the AT, or I could never do a long through hike. And, you must have known so much before you started. And I just say, you learn as you go, and you figure it out. And as long as the desire is there, you can do it,
And funnily enough, I don't want to overplay the ex-boyfriend, because you're married now, aren't you? So
No, I'm not married.
Sorry, I thought you were. Sorry. Okay, so because I know I'm dwelling on him a little bit, but you actually did a shakedown hike with the ex-boyfriend on the Foothills Trail. And we talked about that the other day, which is I'm told that's a terrific hike to do for a shakedown. But you went with him. Did he start to think, wow, I'd kind of like to go with her and do this hike? Did it sort of live with him as well?
Yeah, and I mean, granted, his story is a very interesting one, separate even after he and I.
All right.
I think.
Don't tell me he's a bloody mass murderer now, is he?
No. He's now a thru hiker. He's done his own hike after we broke up.
Oh my gosh! Yeah. All right, there you go.
I think being around me during that time while I was figuring out my thru hike, and then when he did the Foothills Trail, which was his first end to end, it's like, I think it's 70 something miles,
76 miles,
yeah,
I think.
Yeah, that sounds right. And that was his first experience really doing something like that. And we had the absolute worst weather you could possibly think of. It was freezing rain, storms. It was January. It was a bad idea.
Oh my gosh.
But I mean, it really was the worst weather you could have for the entire time there. And I think not only is that a good shakedown hike, but a good anticipation for, if you can endure that kind of weather, you're going to be probably fine in the future. But I think it actually kind of ignited a little bit of an interest in hiking for him, which he had not had before that, to that degree.
Nice. And we're going to leave him behind after this last question. He actually gave you a trail name, didn't he?
He did, yeah. I kind of like to say he started it and then the AT continued it, and it was a good trail. Honestly, it was just kind of a perfect trail name for me, so I give him credit for that. But
so tell us why you're Tetris then.
Yeah, so my name is Tetris, which I've now kept on all of my hikes, and it got started because I did pack too much. I packed a lot, but I was able to fit it all in my bag because I'm so very organized in exactly how things go into the bag itself. And so he gave me that name, and I wasn't going to keep it on the AT. I was going to just let myself get a name, the way that you do.
Sure.
And it was my first hostel that I stayed at. And I guess that was probably about almost a week in. Mm-hmm. And, the people who owned the hostel at the time, there were a couple other hikers with me who also didn't have names. They're like, okay, we're going to give you, your thru hiker name, and we're going to ask you a series of questions to try to figure out, kind of what fits for you. And so they were doing that exercise, and I was sleeping on the floor. And so I had unloaded my entire bag because, of course, it had rained. Surprise, surprise, it's the Appalachian Trail. Yeah. So I had unloaded the entire backpack to kind of reorganize everything, get my, stuff sorted. And they were going through to my name, and they said, first question, have you ever had a name before? And I was like, well, I don't know if mine counts or not. So they're like, well, just tell us. And I said, well, my previous name that I had was Tetris. And they said, explain it. And I did. And then they were looking at my bag with all this stuff on the ground. And they were like, how in the heck did you fit all of that into your backpack? And I kind of looked at it. I was like, I Tetrised it. And they were just like, oh my gosh, that's a perfect name for you. You need to keep it. And so I did.
So for a non-planner, you're still organized. That's an interesting dichotomy, isn't it, I guess. Now, all of this sounds great. You're preparing, you're getting ready to go and so on. Tell everybody what your planned start date was.
Oh, yeah. So, I mentioned this to you, Steve, before that I hiked the Appalachian Trail in the year that shall not be named.
Yes.
I did do it in 2020. And my original plan. So I told my work 3 months in advance that I was going to be going on this long trail so that they had plenty of time to get new hires and everything ready to take over my job. And my planned start date was.
So you quit. You weren't going on a sabbatical then. You quit. You weren't.
I did. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. It was that was part of my shake it up. Let's change everything.
Yeah. Of course,
if I make it hard to come back, maybe that's not a bad thing. As far as, I need to maybe do something new at the end of this trip. So yeah. That being said, I did go back and work for them for a short period of time. Right. But yeah, I was supposed to start March 20th of 2020 on the AT.
Yeah, and when we were speaking the other day, my memory is I think the NBA closed down around that week, maybe the week before. And as soon as the NBA closed down, I thought, oh my God, this is serious stuff. I actually went to a conference with about 2,000 people the weekend before you're supposed to go. Yeah. So, that was a dangerous time. We didn't know we were going to have the conference. It was apparently the last major conference, it was a podcasting conference in the country. All the conferences closed down. So you as a responsible doctor, you must have seen the beginnings of this. Had you already seen it in your hospitals?
Yeah.
What was going on in your life as a doctor then?
Yeah. So, my last day of work, if I remember correctly, was March 14th of 2020. Right. And I had one of the first cases of COVID on my service that week. Wow. And, it was just an interesting time because there was just so much that we didn't know and it was spreading so fast. And at that point in time, the policy was that if you had any exposure to COVID, that you would be kind of officially quarantined for 14 days. And my exposure was my last day of work. Yeah. Oh my and so God. I remember thinking, well, that in a way is, kind of not a bad thing because I'm not working after this. It doesn't affect anyone other than myself to be in quarantine. And I remember thinking, if I don't really know what's happening with this hike right now, I'm going to wait and see. And then that next week, the whole world shut down. Indeed. And all of a sudden, I was in this position of being like, oh my gosh, who knew a pandemic was going to happen during my planned AT through hike and, taking this time off as a doctor. And it was I struggled a lot in the beginning. Well, during that quarantine period, those 14 days, I remember thinking, what does this mean for me and, the next 6 months of my life? And I thought, okay, well, I'm really disappointed because I was so excited about doing this.
I'm sure you were, yeah.
And the other part of me was thinking, well, whenever in your lifetime will, number one, you live through a pandemic, and then number two, be a doctor living through a pandemic, where where the need for us is so high. So I thought about it for a long time, and I said, you know what? I've got these 6 months, and I will just reach back out to my home facility. At that point in time, New York was in desperate need for doctors, and reached out to them, and I just said, I'm available, if you need me, I'm here. And I was really praying about it and just being like, I'm just going to be open and flexible, and looks like the AT is not going to happen. And that's that. So I did. I reached out, and believe it or not, even though I reached out, everybody kept saying, I think we're okay. I think we're okay. Thank you for your interest. And we can't use you. And I kind of took that as a sign of like, okay, well, I guess I'll just keep doing what I can. So I just was doing day hikes thinking this will just be all I get to do, but at least I can be outside. And financially, I had planned to be off for 6 months. So I was in a good position.
Did you, I know I keep going back to him. Did you ring up the ex-boyfriend at all?
No.
Okay, fine. We'll move on from him now.
No, right? Okay. No, that's okay. I think at that point, the decision had been made and nothing needed to.
So, but you hadn't abandoned the dream, had you? Tell us how you got back on the AT.
So, I think it was the end of April, if I remember correctly. Georgia opened up kind of the outdoors again
That's right.
because there was a time where they were saying, no, we don't want anybody out here. We don't want anybody on the trails. We're just trying to keep people, away from each other as much as possible.
Sure.
And somewhere near the end of April, I remember Georgia kind of opened up again. And I remember thinking, okay, we know how COVID works. Once things open up, people are going to congregate and then we're going to have issues again. So I thought in my brain, I will wait at least 14 days. And if everything in 14 days looks like maybe it's calmed down, then I will hike the AT section of Georgia only. Because at that point, that was the only thing that was kind of open. So May 14th, my parents graciously dropped me off at the start of the AT. And I said, I'm going to go northbound and finish Georgia. And then I'll just see what happens. But if that's all I can experience of the AT, I'll still be happy with that. And just my mantra was just a day at a time. Just enjoy the trail one day at a time for whatever days you're given.
Were there many other people on the trail that day when you first started?
There is nobody.
I wouldn't have thought so because that's quite late anyway, isn't it? But as luck would have it, you got through Georgia, and almost on the same day, North Carolina opened up.
Yeah, and it was one of those.
Let's keep going.
It was just, I'd like to say luck, but I think it was probably just more providence. I think, as somebody who believes in God, I think God just was like, this is an experience that Lydia needs to have, and I'm going to allow her to have it. And honestly, as I got to borders opened.
Wow.
So Georgia, as I was starting to finish Georgia, North Carolina opened. As I, got to the Smoky Mountains, they were starting to allow kind of limited permits to get through. And I was able to get permits to get through, which was a whole process in and of itself. And then North Carolina, and then Virginia. And I just was like, well, I'll just keep going until I can't go anymore.
Yeah, because you're right. You'd written the time off. You had the budget, so it kind of works out. What did it feel like that year? Did you all feel like renegades out there, and you kind of a band of brothers and sisters together? Yes,
actually, that's a very good way of putting it. I didn't have anything to compare it to because I'd never, done a thru hike before, and I didn't know what the AT was normally like on a given year. I knew the numbers for the AT that year were significantly lower, and I started kind of in the off season by starting in mid-May. Yeah. So there really weren't many of us there. And
you must have spent quite a bit of time by yourself on trail, didn't you?
Not as much as you'd expect compared to now having done the CDT. But, within about, I don't know, I would say a month, I was really probably the first 2 weeks, I didn't really meet anybody. And then I started to kind of cross paths with some people who had gotten off the AT when everything happened and were getting back on where they left off to keep going north. And there weren't many people who came back to do the AT after they got off and
right,
roached.
Exactly, yeah.
So
it messes up so many plans. It just messes up so many plans.
Yeah.
And how did the trail towns treat you? Because you started mid-May, they were probably a little bit better to you the further up trail you went, weren't they? Because it was getting better?
No.
Or did you find it difficult there? Right. Okay.
While I was on the trail, we had the second wave happen. And when you're on trail, as you know, you are just so far removed from what's going on in the world and you don't know what's happening. And, so much happened in 2020. A lot happened in the news and, those of us on trail just didn't know about it. And so I was hiking through a lot of the second wave of COVID, which was really pretty terrible. And
do you feel guilty as a doctor doing that? Or not?
I did in the beginning. I really struggled with that. But I think the fact that I was trying to offer, my services and was just hearing no back. And I was like, well, if I can't do anything, I'd rather be hiking.
Yeah.
And then the one, I think, good thing that came from it is, as a doctor, I did miss a lot of what so many of my colleagues went through, which was really hard on them. They were working 24-hour shifts. Everybody was getting sick. There was so much that we didn't know. Some of my colleagues' family members died because of COVID. A lot happened during that year and a lot of just trauma, really, for everyone involved.
To be fair, though, Lydia, you'd made the decision to do the hike before any of us knew about COVID anyway. So it's kind of the way it goes, isn't it? And did the trail, once you got to Katahdin and you made it in early October, because we're going to talk about the CDT in a minute, but did it do what you wanted it to do? Did it shake up your life?
You know, when I finished on Katahdin, I think I thought I was going to feel this overwhelming emotional something.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, when I got to the top of Katahdin, it was the first snow of the year was when I summited, and it wasn't the greatest weather. And I remember thinking, I got to the top, I got to the sign, and I was just like, get me off this mountain. I am so done. I never want to walk again. Honestly, if there's a wheelchair at the top of this mountain, I would have taken it down the mountain. I was done hiking. People said, are you ever going to do it again? I said, absolutely not. I think I've done enough hiking in this AT for the rest of my life. I think I'm good. And I didn't think anything had changed. I came back home. I actually did end up helping out at the hospital that I'd worked at before, which was was actually really good because at that time I took over the COVID units because I was I haven't been that person and my colleagues need a break. So when
Did you catch it? Did you catch it?
No, I did not. I mean, I've had it since then from my nieces and nephews, but no, I did not catch it during that time period. I mean, we were doing so much, masking up the whole thing, but I was able to work on the COVID wards when I came back as like my way of being like, let me take this on because you guys have had to do it for so long during some of the worst of it. So that was
I say nice. It's not nice, but good for you for doing it and recognizing it's something you felt your contribution would be that, and that's great. But you felt much as I did when I finished my hike. I said I'm never going to hike again, just never going to do it. But there's something about it once you go away, and all the pain that you were feeling every darn day seems to go away, and you suddenly think, well, it might be a quite interesting thing to do. And in your case, unusually actually, you chose for your second big hike the CDT, not the PCT, which most people tend to. What was the rationale behind that?
A couple different things. I think because I did the AT during 2020, and it was, of course, I didn't have a ton of people around. I didn't have the AT experience that a lot of people had. It really was actually probably the most wilderness that the AT has ever been was that time in 2020.
Yes.
And that was my experience of it. And I loved that. I love that there weren't a ton of people out there. And the ones that were just really just good, solid people, just good people. And I remember thinking, well, that was my experience of the AT. But, now the PCT, it's, been several years now. And I know the volume of people who hike that trail.
Sure.
And I kind of wondered if it might be a bit overwhelming for me to hike it with so many people after not having that experience on the AT. And I remember how much I loved the wilderness and some of the solitude. And I thought two things. Number one, I know the CDT is going to be a more lonely trail because not as many people do it. And I thought that's probably what I wanted again for my second trail. And number two, I didn't have to worry about any of the permits in the same way the PCT is, which is a little complicated sometimes to figure out. And I know they keep changing how you do it with the lottery. And I thought I don't have to do that with the CDT. And I wasn't entirely sure when my start date would be. So I kind of thought this gives me that kind of freedom.
Well, when we spoke the other day, I was listening to you talk when we were talking about this, why the CDT. And listeners listening will hear you as as I thought the other day, very bubbly, outgoing, gregarious sort of person. But you're wanting to get away from it all. Is it people you don't like, or you just like your own company in a solitary environment?
That's funny. I do hear that a lot. So I am bubbly and I love people. And a lot of my job every day is relational, right?
Sure.
And it's talking to people every day and sometimes during the worst times of their life. That's my job as a doctor.
Sure.
And I have to, kind of give all of myself when I do that job. And there's an introvert side to me that people don't realize exists. And
keep it well hidden.
Yeah. I feel like that's honestly like me going and doing these hikes allows that introvert side to kind of re-energize. And just being in nature is very it's cathartic. It's I like that side of it. Yeah.
So to go on the CDT, you were back, you changed actually how you do the work, hadn't you? You'll become more, is it a travel doctor of some sort?
Yeah. So I work more with a flexible provider type thing. Yeah.
Like a mercenary. You're like a mercenary.
Yeah.
A mercenary doctor.
Yeah, just hire me. I'll just go wherever you guys send me. I'll work a couple of weeks. It's fine. Yeah.
And it works. And so you literally can pick your hours whenever you want to do it and come and go as you please. So you've now set yourself up with this lifestyle to do this. And because, I want to come back a little bit to the introversion, not the introversion, the planning or lack of planning. When we spoke a few days ago, you said, and this is a quote, by the way, so I put inverted quotes around it. Some of the excitement is what is 1 week ahead of me. What do you mean by that? Because I wasn't sure whether you're a planner or not. Do you just want to let the hike unfold in front of you as it happens, or not know what's coming up next?
Well, I think through hiking, and that appeals to this totally other side of me. I am extremely, like my backpacking and my name Tetris goes, I am extremely organized and efficient in my job. And it's all about planning and being multiple steps ahead and having a goal for patients and creating a care plan. Like there's so much thought that goes into my job that I feel like when I do a long hike, I don't want to be as I want it to be a kind of more of a looser experience in a way, so that maybe that part of myself can relax and say, you know what, just think 1 week ahead at a time. So when I plan, like I did on my AT hike a little bit, and then I did on the CDT, I usually just plan what I need to do to get to the next resupply location, which, usually is about a week ahead of me. So I really only plan, I'll look at mileage. I'll kind of get an idea of how many miles I want to do a day, where the water sources are, and then how many days of food that I think I need based on that mileage to get to town. And then I get to town and in town, go through, okay, what's the next number of miles and food that I need to get to the next town to resupply. Yeah. And I really only look a week ahead. And when I do that, I feel like the experience is, I experience it more in the moment.
So Tetris truly is your alter ego, isn't it? There's the buttoned up Dr. Lydia who's really doing efficiency, and then there's a slob on trail who's just saying, just let it hang out, just do what I want to do, happy days.
Yeah, that's so funny. So the guy I'm dating right now is like, I don't understand how you're so bad at logistics compared to what you do in your normal life. I was like, just two separate parts of my life, just two separate.
That's funny. So what were your dates on the CDT? Because that was last year, was it? Because 2020 was your AT hike, and last year, 2024, was your CDT. What dates did you do?
So I love it because I'll always remember when I start, because I started on tax day. I started April 15th. I started at the Southern Terminus, and I finished August 28th.
So that's almost exactly the amount of time it took you to do the AT as well, isn't it? Yeah. 4.5 months, something like that. Yeah, you must be quite a mover. You must move quite fast.
I don't think I am, based on, I don't mean to always compare myself, but the other people that I met on the CDT were just, I didn't meet them very long because they were so fast and doing such big miles.
Really? Oh, right. Okay.
So, for me, I was like, I thought I was doing pretty good. And I was doing exactly what I enjoy doing, which I think I averaged about 25 miles a day. And then I did a couple 30s, but only when there's a lot of flat sections on the CDT. Yeah. And when you've got 16 hours of daylight in the summer, you almost are like, well, I guess I'll just keep walking,
Yeah, damn right. Yeah. Yeah. And I know it's a bit of a choose your own adventure thing. How did you make those choices? Were you looking to do the shortcuts all the time, or were you looking to just say, I know there's this down the road, I'll go and see that? What was your method?
Honestly, some of it ended up being weather related. So when there was some avalanche risk in parts of Colorado that I kind of had to reroute around, but other than that, some of it ended up just being what sounded fun at the time. So I did some kind of when I was in the Wind River Range, I just heard about how beautiful one of the alternates were. And so I was like, well, okay, I'll just do the alternate then and kind of go more into the Wind River Range and then kind of come back to the red line, the CDT line. And some of these were just the best decisions I ever made because some of it I just did because somebody said it was really pretty. And I was like, okay, that sounds good. The biggest alternate that I did do was I did what they call the Super Butte cutoff or the Big Sky cutoff, which is not actually it's kind of made up, honestly. Everybody kind of does their own version of it.
Yeah,
and that kind of cuts around one of the C-shaped portions that go into Idaho. Some of that was because I wanted to celebrate my birthday in a town.
Quite right too.
And I had my big 40th birthday on trail.
Oh, did you?
And I had this goal in my head that I wanted to do 40 miles on my 40th birthday and end in a town.
Christ, a bit like you weren't 60.
Yeah, definitely don't think I would be doing 60 miles. And I had this idea that I would end in Helena, Montana at that road crossing. And so part of me is like, okay, well, I really want to get to this point by this time. And, if I do that, I can take a few days off for my birthday to enjoy it in town. And then it will make it so I don't have to rush to get to the border. I'll have plenty of time.
And to be fair, that the way in which you hike by yourself generally, we've talked about it a lot on the show about people hiking with somebody and people having to compromise when they hike with somebody. You had to compromise with nobody with your hike. You could do exactly what you wanted. So that, I think on balance, that's probably the best way to do it in many ways, actually. And so you did both those two hikes. And I'm sure the PCT at some stage in the future is a probability, I would say. Now because you're going to want the Triple Crown at some stage.
Yeah.
Did you take away different things from the two different experiences?
Yeah, I did. And I love that question because I don't know if I've actually sat with that very much before. Like what exactly, how would I put that into words?
Sure.
And I think the AT it seems so out of my wheelhouse. It seems so big to me when I came up with that idea, and I wasn't sure that I could do it. I'd never hiked anything like that before. I'd never done anything like that before.
Sure.
And I think there was just a lot of questions of, can I physically, mentally, can I through hike this? And then when I finished, the AT, it took me a couple of weeks once I got back home to be like, wow, I am so much more capable than I ever allow myself to be. Because how often do we, in our culture in the United States, how often do we ever push ourselves past where we think we are capable? And
that's so true. And so sad. So sad. If it takes a 6-month hike, or in your case, 4.5-month hike to work it out, it's a sad indictment, I guess, of the way we live our lives, and getting out there and realizing what you've done. The word I remember thinking, I felt accomplished once I'd done that, and I realized there was no real problems to me. So I suppose going into the CDT, you took so much more into the CDT, didn't you? So you kind of walk and you think, I got this. I know what I'm doing here. I know where it's going. So talk about, I know you're a doctor and you got involved with wilderness training. What was was it because you were a hiker, you wanted to get involved in wilderness training?
That's actually one of the things that happened after the AT. That evolved actually from my AT experiences. I said, I love being outside. It makes me feel more whole than anything I've ever done. And I love people who love the outdoors. Like I find that the outdoor community is just a different type of community, and through hiker community specifically, a very unique, interesting, wonderful community. And I love them. Sure. And I remember thinking, what are ways that I can support that community better? And how can I use being a doctor in this setting? Because, I work in a hospital, injuries and things that happen outside are such a different experience and how you approach them and deal with them. And I did not feel like I had that training. And I was like, well, if I keep doing things like this, issues and medical emergencies will happen just by the very nature that you're out there and being exposed to it, whether they're my own or someone else's. And I wanted to be equipped for that. And so that's actually when I applied to do a wilderness medicine fellowship. So a 1-year specific training for wilderness medicine.
Wow.
After finishing the AT, that's how that kind of like segued.
Nice. Very nice. And have you actually put it to practical use when you've been on trial? Because I've got to tell you, someone falls over and gets injured and somebody walks up and says, I'm a doctor, stand back. That would be an impressive thing to be able to do to somebody. So have you actually used it on people to help people out on the trial?
I have. The interesting thing is probably the most, if I can remember right, the most kind of interesting scenario that happened to me, the event that happened, was before I had the training.
All right.
And it was a case of really severe acute mountain sickness or issues that you get with high altitude, where a girl, I think, had such severe illness that it was actually affecting her brain. So high altitude cerebral edema is what we call it, which can be life threatening.
Sure.
And I was kind of in this position of, I was a baby doctor back then. And I was like, oh, this is bad. We need to get her down. Like, we need to get her down now. And, trying to use what I had at my disposal at that time to be able to facilitate that for her. And I remember thinking, man, I wish I was better trained to deal with stuff when I'm in the middle of nowhere with nothing without having stuff. And I remember thinking that experience was kind of the integral moment where I said, I want to be able to be a better physician in austere environments where I may not have everything at my disposal that I have inside of a hospital. And know how to be as effective as possible.
And you apparently helped with the scenarios that our friend Dr. Lynn attended near Roanoke, which we've talked about. If you had to pare wilderness training down to a few points for a layman like me, because I know nothing about anything like this, what do you think would be the most, two most important things that we should think about while we're out there?
So, as far as the question of like, what is wilderness medicine, or
no, what should we be aware of? I mean, I'm sure you went to this training and learned stuff you didn't know before. And are there something we as a layman should think about when we're out there?
Yes. I would say if I could give any advice, I would say, having someone that always knows where you are.
Sure.
Having that plan that there is always someone who knows where you are, when you should arrive somewhere, checking in can help avoid some issues. Buying, good evacuation insurance. I mean, I hate to say that. I mean, a lot of that now is involved with our GPS locators where you have to have that, but having that, carrying some sort of satellite device on you when you are going into the backcountry. Absolutely.
Did you?
Yeah. Yes. Right. I definitely do.
Yeah. No, don't give advice you haven't done yourself.
Yeah. Exactly. That is very true. I would say those are two big things is, that part of planning for your trip, having your contact back home, know where you're supposed to be, knowing the route that you're taking and being aware of it. And then having some way to contact when maybe you don't have cell service is very, very helpful. Of course, I always say having some basic medical kit with you, which I actually teach students, kind of things to think about. And then if you're hiking with anyone, making sure they know what your medical issues are. If you have an allergy to bees, if you're a diabetic, and knowing where your medical equipment is in your pack, just some basics.
Now, I want to go back to the beginning again. This, not because I didn't like what we talked about, but I want to talk about what you said at the beginning. It's all started because you wanted to shake up your life. In what way can you measure that that's happened?
That's a great question. I would say that I have learned from thru hiking what is important to me and how to prioritize that. And how living a more unconventional life, especially as a physician, is okay.
Sure. Yeah.
To say, it's okay if, you're not the full-time doctor who's working your way, up in administration and, has the, the big house and the boat and all of these things. At the end of the day, finding ways to live your life that obviously support yourself, but allow you to be happy and pursue the things that you care about. You don't need to make excuses for that. Like as far as saying, you just say you enjoy it. And I think right now I'm trying to say, Lydia, it's okay to live your life differently than how others expect you to live it. Because the question is, are you enjoying it? And I am. And for me, we have one chance, right? This is our one life, and we should enjoy it.
This is not a dress rehearsal, is it?
No, it's not. And so
this is where we're going.
I think that's the change. Yeah.
I'm so delighted that one of my friends I met on trail, actually, a guy called Mark Alamong, suggested that I reach out to you. He referred to you. She said, because I always talk about the amazing young women we meet on the trail. He said, she is one of those amazing young women. He said, her name is Dr. Lydia Kuhn, and she's a true badass. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your badassedness with us. And I just wish you well. And let me know when you do the PCT, and we'll get you back on. You tell us all about that.
I definitely would love that.
Okay. Good to talk to you. Okay. Right. Take it easy. Bye then. What a woman, eh? Doing the CDT by yourself as a woman must be more challenging than any of the other hikes from a safety perspective. But Lydia didn't see it that way. She loved the solitude and she loved the hike. You've got to admire that. And being a travel nurse, she's been able to work out her life to embrace this lifestyle. And I particularly liked her advice at the end. Don't be afraid of living your life differently to suit you. That is good advice for anybody. And learning more about wilderness medicine allows her a richer understanding of what it's like to be a doctor in the wild. So if I ever get injured on a trail, I'll be looking out for a Lydia to come around the corner and say, stand back, I'm a doctor. Great stuff. Just before we hear from Chris, I'd like to open up a small discussion with you, my listeners. As some of you will recall, our Mighty Blue class of 2025 comprises two hikers, Beth and Dave. I'll be interviewing them each 4 times before they set out on trail, and the first conversation is with Dave next week as he has an early March start. Then, when they are on trail, I intend to check in with them both each week to mark their progress. All well and good. My dilemma is that I'm going back to Spain for a second Camino, this time by myself and using the albergues along the way, doing it on a far smaller budget than I took with me in 2018. My question to you all is, do you want me to podcast from the Camino? I know I've done it before. And still have Beth and Dave, or are you happy with those two until I get back? I'm happy with either way. I mean, I did podcast my 2018 Camino, and I don't want to push another one on you all if you'd rather restrict those episodes to our AT hikers. Email me at steve@hikingradionetwork.com and tell me what you think. Now let's hear from our sponsor, Chris Casado at TSX Challenge. Here's Chris. Okay, well, we've got my friend and now benefactor, because he's sponsoring the show. This is Chris Casado. Hey, Chris, how are you?
Hey, good morning, Steve. I'm doing good. Thank you.
Now, you've very kindly let me sort of write my own ads in the last couple of weeks, which I've really enjoyed doing, actually, because it's given me time to reflect back. And so tell us why you want to do this and reconnect with our listeners.
I think the feedback we've had just from people who have listened to your podcast and who have joined us over the last couple of years has been incredible. We've had some amazing people from mainly across the East Coast, from Florida all the way up to Maine, who have connected with you and through the Appalachian Trail and all the work that you do out there. And they've had a great experience out in the West. We've been very fortunate to have some amazing people, great stories, and our goal here was really just to find a way to reconnect with your listeners and let them know, hey, we exist and you're always welcome out here with us.
It's funny, actually, when as an East Coaster, you look at California and these massive bloody mountains, but, we've got good mountains over here as well, but it seems like those mountains are pretty inaccessible. Your guys have made it more accessible. And I know that quite a few of us who went on the challenge to Whitney have hiked together since then. Why is it, do you think, that just a single week trip can forge such strong connections? Because they really have.
Yeah, I think it's when you have those moments of like really challenging experiences and things where you have to like overcome something personal or overcome something difficult, it tends to bring people together in ways that maybe you don't have kind of in the front country. That could be a lot of different areas you may have that experience, but especially when you're backpacking, there's also fewer distractions. I think, there's no email, there's no internet, there's no cell phone. And so when you have those moments when you're out there, trying to reach a big goal, working together, it opens up opportunities around the campfire to share stories, to get to know people a little bit deeper. And those bonds, I really think start to come through with some of these longer trips like this.
And I know obviously every team, we were team 6, every team thinks they're the best team. And I'm not asking you to say one way or the other. Yeah. But did you see that same sort of connection with other groups that went as well?
We do. Oftentimes, it's one of the most gratifying things about organizing these trips is it's the people, right? So it's the people that make the connections. And for me, that's the inspiring aspect, or what inspires people for a lifetime is what carries on past the trip. And it's always super rewarding to see people when they text or email back or share a picture and they were out in Kilimanjaro, or they were out in the Pacific Northwest, or they were out in the Grand Canyon, or doing something else together, and finding that time to enjoy the time backpacking. They found a common interest, people that you would never have otherwise encountered in your day-to-day life, which I love the most, right? Because we're all coming from different backgrounds, different walks of life, and I love it how that kind of common interest brings people together on the trail, and then you can kind of take that to the next level in your own personal life, and not just on the trail, I think, but also those personal connections that help you through life.
Sure. In fact, sharing the same space is a powerful thing anyway, isn't it? I found that certainly when I was doing the Appalachian Trail, but, we bonded as a team out in California so well. It's amazing. And I know, talking about teams, you're taking your family out on a spring break trip this year. Is that right?
We are, yeah. I really enjoy taking families out. I actually encourage not just myself, but actually the guides that we have. If they have kids and family, I encourage them to take them out with them as well. The trip that I'm going to be doing is just a private trip, a family trip, but we're going to be taking 3 dads and about 7 kids out to the Grand Canyon to do 5 or 6 nights backpacking on something called the Thunder River Deer Creek Trail, which is some beautiful waterfalls down by the river.
So you never sold me on that one, by the way, but everybody I know has been there, absolutely loves it. But so this is not just a rim to rim. This is down and being in the canyon. Yeah,
this is a little bit more of a loop. It's on the north rim. And it's a little bit of a drive to get out there. It's about 5+ hours, give or take, from the Flagstaff area, the base side of on some dirt roads that are a little bit gnarly, especially in the springtime after the winter storms and the snow. And depending on the weather, it could be hard to get out there. But once you're down there, it's usually pretty spectacular weather, especially in the spring. The best time to be in the Grand Canyon is typically mid-March to mid-May. And so the spring break, I think this year for the kids, I have 3 of them. 10, 14, and 16.
Oh,
they so this is their dad hangout time pretty much.
Yeah, right.
Nothing I would rather do with my time than hang out with my 3 kids backpacking in the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. So they can't take their phones, I presume, other than to take pictures, because there's no signal there at all.
Correct.
That's nice. That's real good. Yeah. And I know that you are looking at some more remote destinations. Tell us about Baffin Island and any others you might have under consideration.
Yeah, so Baffin Island is new for us this year. Actually, we kind of launched it this year, and we're going to be leading a trip out there in 2026. Right. It's in a really remote corner of the northeast of Canada. So kind of think of it like near Greenland, but across the way in Canada.
I had to look it up on the map. I literally had no idea. I knew it was Canada-ish, Canada-like, but I had no idea where it was.
This place has been on my radar for 20 plus years. I was first introduced to it. I was living in Canada, so I lived in Toronto, right. Just around the year 2000, give or take. And the Nunavut, which is kind of the territory where Baffin Island is located, was just becoming kind of a formal territory in Canada. And so there were a lot of documentaries on like the CBC that I was watching. I remember seeing these pictures of this place, and it captured my imagination. And back a few, maybe a couple of years later, I actually wrote to the Park Service. They sent me this, the old school pamphlets with all the information. Nice. I had it here in a file with me literally for 20 plus years. And then finally, I connected with Alyssa. I think you had Alyssa of Rainbow Bright. Yeah,
Alyssa the best surname of all time. Whoa.
Yeah. So she has some experience in the north and the cold and above in the Arctic. And the 2 of us got together, and she really encouraged me to say, hey, Chris, if this is on your radar, why don't we just put this together and make it happen? And so we finally did the research and really excited to share this trip. It's a bigger trip. A lot of it is just getting to the Arctic is a big challenge. And then once you're there, you have to take a boat up a fjord and hike, 1 to 2 weeks, roughly speaking, across a traverse, and then you take the boat out and then you fly out again. So lots of logistics get up there, but it should be a pretty spectacular experience.
And funny enough, you mentioned Alyssa, because I want to know, is there an optimum limit to the number of destinations you want? Because I'm sure that you need to keep control of the whole thing without getting too unwieldy. How do you kind of build your team to lead these trips? Because you can't do everything, can you? You can't be the leader all the time.
That's true. That's a learning process for us. It's a learning process.
You mean it's a learning process for you?
It's a learning process for me, for sure. Right now, we've stayed very focused. We really just do 3 locations. We take people out in the Sierra, which is like my own backyard where I grew up and I love. And most of the routes that we have in the Sierra are places you won't find, from other like outfitters or people that lead trips in the mountains. We take people places that are a little bit harder to get to and are very personal for us. In the Grand Canyon, we have kind of the largest lineup of backpacking experiences in the Grand Canyon, to the most remote destinations. And then we have one other location in Northern California, which is the Lost Coast. And that's kind of not far from where I live, 4 hours north of kind of the San Francisco Bay Area.
Almost local.
Yeah, a little local. Well, a few other areas we're looking at. I'm looking at the Gila Wilderness, or Gila Wilderness, which is in New Mexico.
Oh, wow. That's part of the CDT, isn't it?
I don't know.
It is.
Is it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
I may be the Gila River is. Sorry, it may be slightly different. So that's my bad, probably. So how do you discover all these things then? These places? Do you say you had Baffin Island in a file for several years? How do you find these places?
Yeah, the Gila Wilderness was introduced to me by a guide who was working with us for about a year, give or take, and then he went out to become a ranger in the area. Right. He's like, Chris, this is beautiful. They just celebrated their 100th year anniversary. They were the first ever wilderness, land designation in the United States. So it was in New Mexico, and they had that celebration. He's like, Chris, they improved some trails. It's a beautiful area. Not many people are out here. You got to check it out. And so we have our first trip that we're planning out there this spring. Kind of a test trip. We're taking some students out there for a 4-night, 5-day experience.
That's awesome. So we had a perfect trip. Nothing went wrong. I fell over once, if you remember, and cut my leg. And I hated that moment when I did that. But I shouted out number 1 because it was my first fall. When things do go wrong, what's is there always a plan? Are you looking at all contingencies? How do you manage a problem when someone can't go on?
Yeah, I think that's the joy and the fun of leading trips like this is there's always something that will go wrong. There's always something you have to prepare for or solve a problem with.
Sure.
I would say, the best solution is usually based on the resources that you have at hand and kind of the situation at hand. There's no one, game plan for solving any, certain situation. It really depends, like where you are, how many people you are, how many people are there, what's the weather like, what's the time of day like, what are the resources available from the park services, depending on what the situation is. What I would say is like all the people that we have out there, we have lots of love and experience in the areas that we operate. They have lots of a big passion for like helping people through difficult situations.
Sure.
They also have Wilderness First Responder certification, which is like an 80-hour coursework, which gives them the kind of the basics of like a half an EMT, roughly speaking,
right,
of managing situations in the wilderness. But we do a lot of training with our guides and spend time out there with them on the trail, and we always have support as well, kind of remotely, to help manage situations and troubleshoot on the spot.
Give us an example of something that happened last year.
Yeah, last year we actually had a group that was connected to your podcast here. A couple of people from the East Coast.
Nice.
I think we had a group of 8 or 9 or 10, roughly speaking, and 2 guides. And on the very first day, you may remember this, it was the Trans-Sierra hike. So we had just woken up in the morning at the trailhead. We had hiked to the first lunch spot, had a beautiful view. Yep. We began hiking down towards kind of the river, and about maybe 35, 40 minutes after lunch, someone tripped and fell. And I was walking up and I was kind of taking the rear, and I looked over and I saw, and he was holding his elbow and holding his arm. Everyone was kind of starting to crowd around, and I looked, and it was actually the second guide. So the other, my backup, so my right-hand man.
Yeah.
Everyone was there to help out. We were able to kind of like assess the situation quickly. It was definitely like a broken or dislocated type situation where it was a broken arm or dislocated elbow. Mm-hmm. And so I radioed for help. Help was not able to make it on time. So we talked to the dispatch, and they're like, the best and safest way to get out is actually to walk out. And so we pulled up quickly, established camp, talked through the routine, kind of laid the groundwork for how what the next 4 to 6 to 8 hours might look like.
Sure.
And we began the process of evacuating him. Got someone to drive up. We walked him out. He was able to tough it up. And then we continued on our trip later on with a little bit extra heavier packs with some extra gear. So we were one man down. Yeah.
I remember I volunteered for the heaviest. What those the bear boxes? I volunteered the heaviest on the first day. I have no idea why I did that.
I thank you for that.
Well, look, once again, I thank you so much for sponsoring our show, obviously, but I wouldn't do this the way in which I'm doing it unless I really believed in what you do. And so I advise all our listeners to get in touch with Chris to see how to do this. So, Chris, you better remind listeners what they need to do to sign up.
Yeah, so this is a long-term perspective. Yeah, I know people are busy with family, work, and life, and this may be a goal that you have this year, years to come. You're always welcome to join us. It's at tsxchallenge.com. If you do decide to join us this year, we are trying to offer a small promotion. Use MIGHTYBLUE at checkout for a 10% discount. But cool. Really, this is reach out to us if you have any questions. In fact, whether you're planning your own trip or you're looking for an organized group like us, reach out to us. We're here to help make sure you guys have a safe and enjoyable trip either this year or in years to come.
That's cool. Well, thanks again. And we'll catch up soon. Okay, mate?
Thank you so much. Thanks, Steve.
Cheers then. Bye. It's always good to chat with Chris, and I'm very grateful that he's seen fit to sponsor our show. Even if you're just interested in hiking in a group, which I highly recommend, by the way, check out tsxchallenge.com and you'll be impressed. I promise you. Just before we hear the next chapter of Emily Leonard's Happy Hiking, I want to thank our donors once more. This week, my thanks go to recurring donors Jessica Diaz, Bruce Brinker, Hugh Eckrath, James Boyd, Small World IFT, Kevin Eastman, and Michael Gosh. Michael, you gave a donation last week, didn't you? You might want to check it out, buddy. I don't want to be double dipping into your funds, so check it out. But thanks to all of you for keeping us on the air. I am so grateful. Now, in the next chapter of her book, Emily's Bruce gets his deserved trail name, Batman. I'll see you next week. Chapter 23, Baba Batman. New York was my favourite state to hike in so far. I was just as shocked at that fact as my husband. I thought New York was all city, crowded and dirty. I'm probably the only person I know who has no desire to ever visit New York City. After hiking the woods in New York State, I now know better. New York has a lot more to offer than the glitz and glamour of Fifth Avenue and Broadway. I still do not want to go to the streets of New York City, but I will wander through the state's woods any day. New York ushered me out with a fabulous 16.7-mile stroll. It was time to say goodbye to the Empire State as I entered Connecticut. The beginning of July was like Christmas for me. Along with my new toe socks, my new poles arrived, and Bruce surprised me with new Dirty Girl gaiters patterned in a patriotic field of blue and white stars and red trim. They went perfectly with my flag-designed do-rag I'd found weeks ago. I was all ready to celebrate in style. Like I say, it isn't how well you hike on the AT, it's how well you look while you hike. I just finished a break on the side of the road, compliments of a trail angel, and I headed across the street to finish 5 more miles. As I crossed, a day hiker jumped out of his car, wrestled his pack to his shoulders, and yelled to me. We exchanged pleasantries and continued up the trail. My sixth sense jumped a little, but vanished when my phone rang. I wasn't on the AT to stay connected, but when I was close to town or near an extraction point, I would turn it on. It was Bruce, and he wanted to know where I was. Luckily, he was only a couple of miles from my location. I said bye to the day hiker and turned back to the road to meet Bruce. We rendezvoused at the crossing I'd just left, and he gave me my new items. Then Bruce had to drive around to where I was heading for the day, and I had to hike. Off I went. I didn't hurry. It was a nice day and the trail was easy. After a mile or so, I called up to the day hiker. He was slowly weaving back and forth on the trail, going more side to side than forward. He was engrossed with taking pictures. I startled him as I approached, and he said, "Oh, great, you called up." He had been really excited to meet me out by the road. The feelings were not mutual. I hoped he was way ahead since I had gone back to meet Bruce. I exchanged a friendly greeting and meaningless chatter. I tried to be nice. The last thing I wanted was to upset him. He didn't seem normal. I don't know what it was about him, but something was off. He reminded me of the character George in Of Mice and Men. He was big, tall and cumbersome. When George stepped aside to take a photo, I went ahead, slowly increasing my pace in a way that wasn't too obvious I was escaping. But he soon came hobbling down the trail to catch up. I slowed again, thinking he would sail by. Nope, George also slowed. My sixth sense turned to paranoia, and I tried texting Bruce to let him know what was going on. But cell service diminished once I got in the woods, and I was on my own. I kept my SOS device handy. I could not shake George. I went fast, and he all but had a heart attack keeping up with me. I dragged, and he matched my slowness. I thought for sure he was going to grab me so he could hug and pet me until he squished me to death. It was the longest 5 miles of the journey so far, but finally Bruce showed up. George continued on, and I never saw him again. That evening, while enjoying fire time with fellow hikers, I retold the George story. The consensus was that I was just freaking out, like I usually do. Then I started to feel really bad. I went to bed thinking I was a mean person. How could I have profiled that day hiker just because he was different? The more I thought about it, the worse I felt. But deep inside, I could not change my gut instinct, no matter how guilty I felt. It wasn't until several weeks later, when I was talking with Bud and Bud Light, who also experienced an uneasy event with that hiker. They shared with me a conversation they had had with George. During their chit-chat, George found out Bud and Bud Light were from Germany, and he digressed into a long monologue about how he loved Hitler and how great a man he was. Just misunderstood. Yikes! I instantly had no more guilt. The next day was Independence Day, the birth of our nation. Usually, we spend July the 4th at home on the lake. This year, the plan was to find a place to camp near the road so Bruce could join me and have trail food. We didn't mind since we would be together. The place we had picked out was the pits once we got there. No other options were open to us, so we resigned ourselves to the fact we needed to find a relatively safe place and sleep in the truck. Before we could find a home for the night, we also needed to pick up Why Not. He was just a little way behind me and he had reached out again for a shuttle. 2 other hikers were with Why Not. Lucky for us, they knew of a lady who was letting hikers tent in the backyard for the night. She was also serving a July 4th Trail Magic barbecue. Good goes around. We committed to help Why Not. He in turn had told the other 2 hikers they could tag along, and we all had a place to call home for the night. The trail really does provide. It was a fabulous barbecue with scrumptious food, and when the sun set, the fireworks began. I didn't stay up to watch the pyrotechnic display. I was tired and retreated to my tent to enjoy the laughter and partying from my own space. Just before climbing into my hubba shelter, I recognised the flip-flop sound of a hiker's walk. At the tent city the previous night, well after all hikers were sound asleep, I was awakened to the sound of flip-flopping all around our tents. It was strange, and I thought someone was searching for what they could claim as their own while we all slept. My tent vestibule was open, and I could peer out. A lone hiker just stood there, looking lost. Seeing he was one of us, I went back to sleep and forgot about it until I heard the distinctive flip-flopping again. This time I asked if he had been with us last night and explained my story. He proudly boasted that he was the guilty one up that late. He had gone partying and was having difficulty finding his tent. We were up bright and early despite the party atmosphere the night before. I was in New England now. I could see the end and the trail was calling. I had to contain myself often so as not to sprint too soon. We dropped Why Not off first, then headed out to my location. He had taken a respite at Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, enjoying 11 days of R&R. I had put him behind me for a while, but he was a machine, and now we were back together. Our plans were to stay together. He liked to hike fast and long. I liked to hike medium and not so far. So we would see. Our goal for the night was the home of Maria in Salisbury, Connecticut. She's a sweet old lady who takes in hikers to help supplement her income. Going to her house was like going to Grammy's house. It had all the charm and character of your typical grandmother's home. Before we went to Grammy's, we were blessed with more trail magic. Red Panda, a fellow thru-hiker, lived close to the trail. She took a few days off and convinced her family to throw some trail magic. Her family was large and generous. We feasted, then feasted some more. We were at the picnic for over an hour and a half. Finally, Bruce said to me, "Shall I get your boots?" I replied, "I suppose I should get hiking." Then he added, "If you're on a pillow tonight, you must hike." I thought Why Not and Who's Your Mama were going to fall out of their chairs laughing. Hoosier quipped, "There's a little tough love." Who's Your Mama was new to my hiking family. Why Not and I met her just prior to the barbecue, and the 3 of us instantly clicked. With that suggestion from Bruce, I strapped on my footwear, and Why Not, Hoosier and myself went off merrily to Maria's house. When we were close to the day's extraction point, I told my hiking buddies I needed to call Bruce to inform him we were almost out. Simultaneously, Why Not and Hoosier Mama excitedly yelled, "He needs to have the trail named Batman." They were hysterical about this suggestion. Up until this point, Bruce did not have a trail name. I tried to give him one, but he hadn't approved of any of my names for him. I couldn't figure out why my hiking friends thought of Batman. I'm not a superhero follower. I didn't understand the connection. I was aware that Batman saves the day like Bruce did for me, but I wasn't feeling their enthusiasm. Then they educated me on the fact that when Batman isn't being Batman, he is Bruce Wayne. Oh my gosh, I loved it. It was perfect. When I was hiking, he was working and carrying on business as usual, until he got a call from me or another hiker in need. Then he turned into Batman, and he's been Batman ever since. July the 6th was an unplanned zero day and became a lesson from legends. On the trail, sometimes you have to push through, and sometimes you have to listen to your body. Why Not and I decided, actually our knees and feet made the decision, to lay low at Maria's house. This lady was amazing. She was 85 years old and had been taking in guests and hikers for 16 years. She was witty, lively and feisty. Being widowed twice and outliving 3 other proposals would send anyone else over the deep end. Not Maria. She was full of life and kept going. Even the ever-ready bunny got out of her way. Maria's mind was as sharp as a tack, and she was quite the flirt, especially with Why Not. She teased him about being blind, which legally he was, and Why Not dished it right back to her about her being deaf. She told us a story about one hiker who asked to go smoke over on the grass, and she told him sure, as long as it was way away, because it made it hard for her to breathe. But, she added, with her deafness, it could be that he had asked, "May I go over there and smoke grass?" She slapped her hands onto her lap and laughed. We spent the afternoon under the canopy visiting with Maria and Lorraine, her neighbour. The little anecdotes and life lessons they had for us were amazing. Maria and Lorraine were from another era, and the stories they shared connected our generations with valuable life lessons. We asked her if taking in strangers was risky business for her. She said when she started her hike at B&B, her family was worried, but she said she has been so blessed. In the winter, when it's cold and lonely, she pulls out her hiker albums and recounts all the memories. She said she could only remember a few hikers who took advantage of her generosity, and when word spread about it one time, another hiker stepped up and took care of the financials, so Maria didn't have to bear the burden. As our social time with the great ladies came to an end, I commented that I wanted to grow up to be just like them. Lorraine said, "All you have to do is have a good sense of humour, keep moving, and be nice." Wow, that seems easy enough. What great lessons from 2 great seniors. Maria was teary-eyed as we said goodnight. She really did make us feel like family, and just like my own grandparents after a visit, she cried. Maria was not a morning person. She knew once we went to bed we wouldn't see each other again. Our hearts broke as we could see the love in her eyes and feel it in her warm embrace. This was one gift I had no idea I would receive when I decided to hike the Appalachian Trail. How many Marias are out there in our own neighbourhoods that we take for granted? One day they'll be gone, and the wisdom, the knowledge, and the love from a bygone era will disappear as well. We were too busy with our day-to-day lives to even give them a second thought. Just think for one moment how much better our world would be if we sought the resources of an elderly neighbour rather than Google. Today made the first full day of hiking with Why Not. We were quite the combination. He was legally blind and I was legally ditzy. He liked to hike in front of me for my safety. He stumbled often and he didn't want his forward momentum crashing into me. One injured hiker was better than 2. He did not need help by any means. Why Not had hiked 1,500 miles so far on his own, and he had done just fine, minus a few bumps, bruises and a sprained wrist. He was a tough nut, and nothing was going to stop him. Since we were together, though, my job from the caboose was to help eliminate any possible threats of injury. I would let him know of low-hanging branches and trees, knee bangers, toe stumblers and ditches ahead of him. Most importantly, I would call out if he started to veer off trail. The trail was obvious, but for someone with limited peripheral vision, the trail and the drainage ditch looked the same. I would yell left or right, depending on which direction Why Not needed to correct. For someone with normal intelligence, this would work fine, but we were talking about me. After a few misguided directions, I confessed to Why Not that I'm directionally challenged. I get my left and rights mixed up. Several halves down the trail, with left meaning right and right meaning left, I learned to focus clearly and give accurate directions. At one point, when we came to an exposed ridge, I concentrated so hard to get it correct that I gave myself a headache. At least I didn't send him over the edge, physically anyway. Despite the rain and humidity, it was a day full of laughs, 3 small inclines and a new state line, Massachusetts, for a total of 13.5 miles. I fell, my first real fall in 1,500 miles. I had slipped off the trail once, way back in the beginning, but this was a fall that could have caused damage. It didn't, though. Why not fell twice? For the record, neither time was due to my misdirection. The dampness from the precipitation and humidity made the rocks greasy. On one particular loss with gravity, Why Not slid down a slippery section of ledge and fell off the lower 3-foot drop, landing splayed out on his pack so hard that he bounced up, flipped over in the air, then landed on his belly with arms and legs spread wide. His face was down in the ground and his leather, down-under brimmed hat covered his head. He looked like a corpse resting upside down. I was so scared. My breath stuck in my throat and I couldn't breathe. I was reaching for my GPS to signal an emergency when I heard him laugh. It wasn't until he rolled over with dirt on his face and his Crocodile Dundee hat still on that I took my next inhale of air. Then we both roared with laughter. I'm not sure if he hurt from the fall or from laughing so hard. It reminded me of a story called Things That Go Bump in the Night, only this version was hikers that bounce on the trail. It was a close call, one we will never forget. Massachusetts was over before we developed hiker stench. We didn't set any records with only 90 miles completed in 6 days. Can't say we enjoyed every step either. Massachusetts is nicknamed Massachusetts. In many places of high traffic, the sod has eroded away from the trail, exposing tree roots that resemble viper pits and are every bit as dangerous, just waiting to grab, twist and wrench the feet and ankles of careless hikers. In areas without roots, we were waddling in mud, tons of it, dirty, slippery, slimy mud. There was black mud, brown mud, red mud and watery mud. With all that mud came mosquitoes, hungry, swarming, biting little demons. Massachusetts was a mixed bag of nuts. We had good weather mixed with the wet yuck. We had good accommodations and a night with Nurse Ratched. That was a real treat. The guidebook made note of a retreat centre. It sounded good to Why Not and myself. It would be a chance to wash off some mud and bug dope. It was the worst experience so far on the trail. Retreat centre? Yeah, right. The kitchen consisted of a coffee pot and a 1-burner hot plate. The beds were mattresses on the floor. No big deal there, except the fact that the room was damp and mouldy. The bathroom was not much cleaner. And to top it all off, laundry amenities meant wearing your clothes in the shower, wringing them out, then putting them in the dryer. But wait, it gets worse. Nurse Ratched only allowed the dryer to run once, so we had to wait for the other hikers who were coming to wash their clothes so they could all be dried together. Ew. If I would have known that, I would not have washed my clothes. Keep in mind we were paying the going rate for what we had been paying at nice hostels. After our night at the insane asylum, we were hosted by Fruit Smoothie and Pumpkin Butt's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Birrell. I hiked with the sister and brother duo back in the beginning. It seemed like ages ago. As we were getting close to Smoothie's place, I reached out. She had to get off trail due to foot issues, but Pumpkin was cruising and in Maine by now. Batman had planned to join us, but instead he dropped us off at our home for the night, then headed to help out Ryan, who was again hiking with GQ and Walking Man. In 24 hours we went from filth and slime to glitz and glamour. After 1,500 miles and 4 months on the trail, it took more than a little bad weather, biting insects and crotchety people to get me down. It was all part of life on the trail. With the good comes the bad, and it's in the bad that we figure out what we are made of. And with the bad, we learn to truly appreciate the generosity of strangers like the Birrells and others we meet along the way. I would need a whole chapter just to list them. The cookie lady and her husband were another such couple who opened their place to hikers. They had a working blueberry farm and country house 100 yards east of the trail. She grew veggies, berries and raised chickens, but her specialty was cookies. In the afternoon, she offered free homemade cookies to hikers who were also welcome to tent in the yard. The owner's only request was a helping hand mowing the lawn. I attempted to mow the lawn the morning before we hiked out, but I could not get any of the motors to work, and Mr. Cookie Man was nowhere to ask for assistance. For the last 2 hiking days in our 11th state, we meandered through Dalton, Massachusetts, where the paper for the US currency is made, and then up and over Mount Greylock, the highest peak in Massachusetts at 3,491 feet. On the mountain, we stayed at the Bascom Lodge, which sits just below the Veterans War Memorial that stands at the summit. I had reached mile 1,586.3 of this 2,189.2 journey. In 10.4 miles, I would enter the beautiful state of Vermont. The view from my bunk was perfect. Rolling hills disappeared into a misty fog. Experiences such as this were what kept me pushing on when the hiking was tough, hard, painful and challenging. Listening to my favourite songs like Days Like These by Asia helped me to push through and overcome any challenge that might have prevented me from enjoying the good that was right in front of me.